Let's start off with Meta. How are retail investors looking at Meta right now? Huge win streak. We just talked about it. Longest win streak for a Mag 7 member ever. Shares up about 18% over that time.
Yeah, absolutely. So retail investors do love Meta. They have been big buyers over the past few years. But going back to the chart that you had just a moment ago, actually one of the things that we're seeing is a bit of a rotation out of Nvidia, which I think it's showing a bit of an interesting dynamic that is happening in the AI space that I heard you talk about to your previous guest just a moment ago. So while Meta is rising and is seeing obviously some tailwinds from retail investors, I don't think that's the main story. The main story has been more on the Nvidia side and also Tesla that you mentioned. But on Nvidia, what's been really interesting is that as the price is rebounding after that DeepSeek Monday news that has really taken the stock tumbling, what we're seeing is retail investors are capitulating as the stock is rebounding. To us here at Vanda, that's a clear sign that as retail investors are stepping out, somebody else is moving in, and by process of elimination, that means that the smart money crowd is stepping back into the stock and still believes in the AI story.
All right, right now we're showing a year-to-date chart of Nvidia. You mentioned since DeepSeek, we've seen the stock rebound. So just for clarity for the audience, if you look back at January 27th, stock's down about 6.5% since then. But if you look at the chart from them, you do see the big rise. So how are retail investors playing this, what you're calling a rebound in Nvidia, as we see it try to recover from some of those DeepSeek losses?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for clarifying that. Obviously, the stock is down, but has rebounded about 14% since the post-DeepSeek trough. What happened is that during DeepSeek Monday on the 27th of January, the institutional supply, so the institutional investors selling out of the stock because of those concerns, it was a bit of a moment of shoot first, ask questions later. But retail investors stepped in to buy the stock heavily. Like it was a record day inflow for Nvidia with $560 million of inflows from retail investors on the 27th of January. But obviously that was not enough to counter the institutional demand. Or the institutional supply selling the stock. Obviously, things have started to turn around, and the stock has rebounded about 14% since that trough after the DeepSeek news. And as of what I was alluding to is that retail investors have really scaled back their participation, and they've started even selling some of those levered ETFs around Nvidia that they had become so accustomed to buying. So to me, seeing the stock rebounding and retail investors selling, again, tells me that by process of elimination, the smart money crowd is back into this trade and is given a bit of a vote of confidence into the Nvidia and the AI trade.
Yeah, one of those levered ETFs you were talking about that retail investors were trying to get out of was the NVDAL. It's a levered ETF for Nvidia shares. So a very interesting story and a very interesting shift for them. One other area of the market that these retail investors are getting interested in is gold, actually. So tell me about that, the relationship between gold and bonds as for retail investors, as we see a lot more uncertainty in the markets with tariffs and other shifts in trade policy.
Absolutely. And obviously today is also CPI day. So what we're seeing a bit of a pickup in buying of gold. We're not at levels that would really gives us concerns of retail investors being so concerned about the macro, the growth picture, but it's a bit of a hedge. And you see that because also what they're doing is that they're selling bonds, right? If they were so worried about the macro and growth environment, you would see purchases of gold and bond rising at the same time. But the fact that they're buying gold and selling bonds is specifically what we've noted that they're selling corporate bonds. It tells you that there's a bit of an inflation hedge happening here. So not massive concern from retail crowds, but definitely as they're buying, they continue to buy the momentum stories in the AI trade, they're hedging their book a bit, especially ahead of today's inflation print.
All right, really interesting. One other area that we talked to you about was the quantum trade the last time you were here. We have not spoken about it since then, I don't think. I think that trade's kind of cooled off. I'm just looking at the charts. It seemed like it was also impacted, at least to some extent, by DeepSeek. I'm looking at stocks like Rigetti Computing. Since DeepSeek down double digits, the ETF that tracks the quantum trade down just about 1.33%. When it comes to retail investors, however, are they still interested in this very speculative trade, or have their interests shifted a bit?
And that's a nice point you made, and that's what we were trying to anticipate and allude in our last conversation. What we saw at the time was the inception or similar dynamics as typical thematic retail-driven bubbles. And what we're seeing right now is actually retail investors, as the stock has rebounded from a post-peak bubble trough, they've taken that chance to sell out of the stock or significantly reduce their purchases. So to me, that tells me that this was a brief story that potentially has structural long-term tailwinds down the line. But in the very near term, at this moment, retail investors are trying to get out of that stock whenever the stock or those stocks in the quantum space are ripping. And to me, that tells me that perhaps that support that had been so vital in late Q4 in the very early days of 2025, now it's waning and probably will continue to wane.